SEGAbits presents Sega Talk, a podcast talking all things Sega! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. So what?
Hello and welcome back to Sega Talk. I'm Barry, with me is George.
Hello everybody.
And you might be wondering, what is Sega Talk? Well, I guess you could consider this Season 2 of Sega Talk. We've done about a dozen episodes. It's already in the can, so let's consider that Season 1. We took a break and now we're back. And you can find those episodes. They are on iTunes. They are on, you just have to search Sega Talk. They're also on YouTube. You just have to search Sega Talk or the SEGAbits YouTube channel, which has a handy-dandy playlist. And of course, you can subscribe both to iTunes, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, you can leave reviews, comments, suggestions. We're always happy to hear what people think of the show and what kind of games you want us to cover. But I guess that's the intro. And so now we're going to be talking about the main course. So George, what game are we talking about?
Virtua Fighter.
Oh, Virtua Fighter. I've never heard of this game.
With an L.
Oh, right. No,
Hard.
Virtua Fighter. And I mean, if you haven't heard of this game, then I don't know why you click play. No, I'm just kidding. It's kind of like, to me, it's just as synonymous with Sega as Sonic the Hedgehog is. Really, it's such a classic fighting game. It's such a classic franchise, and it's such a small franchise for how long it's been around. But we're going to be talking about the very first entry, the arcade version of the game. And in the end of this episode, we'll be talking about the ports. So if you're a big fan of the 32X or Saturn, stick around. We will talk about those. So Virtua Fighter, it is basically the grandfather of all 3D fighting games, developed by Sega AM2 and released in arcades in October 1993. The game tried to focus on simplicity and controls compared to the massively popular Street Fighter II. The game used only 3 buttons for punching, kicking, and guarding. So the first question we're going to pose to ourselves and discuss is, what is our opinion on Virtua Fighter, and do we think it has aged well? George.
It's funny because I feel like the Virtua Fighter is one of those franchises that really built on itself, like, oh, this is the basic concept that we have, and then 2 really expanded on it. Like, 2 is a huge, massive leap. And I think this is a lot with Sega arcade games. We did one on House of the Dead, and then we kind of talked a lot about how House of the Dead 2 did a lot better, and did everything a lot better. And I feel like Virtua Fighter is the same thing. The only thing I've noticed is that the aesthetics of this game seem to have, I guess, we're going to talk about this later, but it has aged probably the best because they use it a lot on merch. I still think the game is really, really incredible for its time. It came out in 1993. That's like crazy. And it looks really good in motion. While the graphics and the polygons might have aged because they're low polygon. And the jumping, I think the jumping is the worst thing. I think that throws everybody off. But outside of the jumping, I think it looks great. And I think it's really captured what they were trying to do with Virtua Fighter. Anybody could sit down and play it and have fun. Mm-hmm. You could figure out when to block. It was more about mind games, I would say. Like, you have to learn the tendencies of the other person. It was so simplified that it was only kind of like rock, paper, scissors. But that's what I got out of it when I played it. What about you, Barry?
Well, I mean, every single time we talk about Sega AM2, I always bring up the fact that they are pure game makers. When they make a game about driving a car, it is the ultimate driving the car game. It's not like they build some deep lore and they're like, your name is Driver McGee and you are driving the ultimate ride. You know, it's like, they're just like, all right, you're in a car, go. And in this game, this is like, there's Virtua Cop. What are you? You shoot at things. You're a cop. Done. And so Virtua Fighter, it's the most pure, it's the purest fighting game. And of course, it's the grandfather of all 3D fighting games. So it's such a pure game. And, anyone can play it. You could be a novice, you could be an expert, and it still is just, it is what it set out to be. And you can make it what you want, basically. Like, it could become... We have, there's people on Twitter who only talk about Virtua Fighter, and they share crazy moves and animated GIFs and stuff. And then there's people, who... I guess I'd say, like me, when I first learned about Virtua Fighter, I was not good at fighting games. And I still am not good at them, but I love playing Virtua Fighter. And
yeah.
I guess it's just a testament, I'm afraid of some fighting games. I'm not going to pick up, someday I'll pick up the new Dragon Ball game, but I'm not going to pick it up and be an expert at it. If anything, I'm going to lose a bunch at it and then be like, man, why did I buy this? I suck at fighting games.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I think it was so simplistic is because compared to like Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 had a lot of hard inputs. I wouldn't say they're hard, but hard for somebody that never played before. Like, to do a DP, you have to literally, it says do a Z. Like, you have to do a Z move on the joystick. But, I mean, it's not really a Z. It's kind of like forward and then half circle. But those kind of moves, those are hard for a lot of new people. Like, Virtua Fighter didn't have that. It was basically, you could combine two buttons, do stuff, and then, so it was very, very much simplistic. You don't have to learn the half circles, and the timing was pretty... It adapted to you. You could do a combo slowly. You could do a combo faster. Depends what you wanted to do.
Right, yeah, and it's a very intuitive game. And I think back sometimes to, you play a platformer and you start to get into the game, and then all of a sudden the main character talks to you and goes, all right, we're going to want to jump over that wall. When you get over there, hold down the L trigger and then press the B button. And it just takes you out because you're like, I'm not jumping. I'm getting basically like a special code for jumping. If you're if my mom sat down to play a video game, she wouldn't go, what button combination do I do to get over that wall? She'd just say, how do I jump? And in Virtua Fighter, there's a button, or you push up on the joystick, and there's a button for punch, and there's a button for guard, and there are button combinations, but it's not like you're memorizing Game Genie codes, and it's like, oh, if you want to shoot a fireball, what you do is you do back front, up, down. And I'm like, what? Why? That doesn't make sense. Like, if you're a fighting game guy, of course you're going to roll your eyes at me for saying that, but in Virtua Fighter, it encourages learning the game on your own and figuring out that, well, intuitively, if I push down and punch, I'm going to punch lower, and it works.
Yeah, and I was going to say, how do you think it's aged?
I think the first one, it's hard to say, because Sega is so good at sequels that I would say the second one is kind of the ultimate classic Virtua Fighter game. Because when you play the first one, you're like, oh, this and this and this is missing, or this isn't refined. A lot of people make fun of the floaty jumps, but I think it has aged very well. Like you were saying with the graphic style, it's this, like, that sort of aesthetic has really come back now, and people are like, oh, we're making an indie game that looks just like, a game from 1993, and people love it now. Someone described it. I did a game room tour, and I was showing off those figures you were talking about that look like the in-game graphics that they did, and they said, I love the carved wood figures, and I said, no, that's the graphic style, and they said, oh, I know, but I love that carved wood aesthetic. They look like puppets or something.
Yeah, and it's funny because I agree with you. The aesthetics would probably be the ones that are, like, aged really well. Like, I really like that figure. I have it too, and it's a really nice looking figure. I think the reason that it's kind of, I don't think it's aged, I don't know if it's aged well, but it's like 1 and 2, it feels like it's an expansion of 1. Like, they took everything they learned from 1, because it came out so soon, right? It came out like the next year. Yeah. And then they redefined it, or refined it, that's more of the word I'm looking for. And if you think about it, that's how Street Fighter became what it was. Like, it was Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and then it was like whatever edition, and then it was like Super Street Fighter 2. Like, they were working on that game for like 4 years, and they did a bunch of re-releases before they moved on to Alpha. And Virtua Fighter never got that. It got like a couple of updates, but like they just moved on right away to Virtua Fighter 2, and I feel like Virtua Fighter 2 and Virtua Fighter 1 are kind of like, they took everything from 1 and obviously expanded it, and then 3 was trying to go a totally different direction, like they tried to add another button and stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, because I mean 2 it was a much faster game. There were attacks from behind, if I remember.
It also had like the polygons finally have textures on them.
Yeah, exactly. And I would definitely agree with you there. You know, it's a much more refined version of the original. And you know, we're not going to touch on the sequels too much on this, but you know, just to mention, I feel like 3 and 4 kind of get lost in the shuffle because 5 is so refined, and 1 and 2 are so kind of like retro that you get into those middle games and you're kind of like, I'd rather either play the old one that is kind of lovable or the brand new one that looks really nice.
Yeah. Especially 4 and 5, those feel like 1 and 2 kind of, you know, like 4 and then 5, like 5 kind of, you know. Yeah. I'm going to get hate for this because I don't know the systems deep down, and I know people that listen to this are going to be like, hey, actually, and they're going to list a bunch of stuff. That's just me coming from a normie aspect of it.
And I think, too, you know, if someone's turned off by the fact that they're not actually getting a deep dive into the whole fighting game system here, I think it's a testament to the series that, you know, two guys like us who are, you know, I think you're a bit more well-versed in fighting games than I am, but we can sit here and talk about Virtua Fighter and not... I would not do this show if it was this episode if it was Dead or Alive, or if it was Street Fighter. I would be lost. I'd be bullshitting my way all the way through it.
Virtua Fighter is a very simple game that anybody could enjoy, and I think that's why it got popular in Japan. I know it never really got as popular in America, but in Japan it was huge because of that aspect. Even a 40-year-old man could come in and play the game.
Now, you did say the game is simple. However, believe it or not, Virtua Fighter does have a plot. And I'm just going to run through the game's plot very quickly here. To be honest, I didn't know the game really had a plot until, you know, these materials came out. But here we go. Try to wrap your head around this. So, once in the era of Showa, the defunct Japanese army invaded to approach Henry Puyi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, in their effort to take advantages. However, they were defeated by the Imperial Guards. Are you sure this is Virtua Fighter? Who utilized the martial art called Hakyuku Ken. Haruken, is that what it is? Later on, the Japanese army was said to have plagiarized the mysterious Hakyuku Ken to create the strongest infantrymen, and based on this art, complemented the ultimate martial art. Approximately half a century has passed since then, and now a young man named Akira Yuki, not to be confused with Yu Suzuki or anyone, journeys around the world to test his martial arts ability. The ultimate world fighting tournament is about to start, and all kinds of fighters from around the world, solely relying on one's physical strength, engage in a life or death tournament to determine the world's #1 fighter. But behind the tournament, however, there exists an intrigue designed by an evil syndicate. What is this, like Streets of Rage now? What's going on?
Yeah.
So, George, what do you think of this game's plot?
The plot is very overly complex, and I remember that some of the characters, like, I don't know, it's this weird, like, 80s movie kind of thing where, like, one person could, like, finish off a dynasty or something with their fists. Like, it's, you know, when you watch those kung fu movies and they're, like, fighting and they're beating each other up, and then all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, why don't they just get a gun and shoot these people? Like, yeah, you're good at kicking, but, like, this is kind of that idea, you know, like, oh, these people are really good at this martial arts skill that's super deadly. So it's very influenced by 80s, 70s, 60s, I don't know, 60s, but kung fu movies. Mm-hmm. As you could tell, like, the idea that they have a move that is very deadly and they taught it to other soldiers, and now the Japanese have the ultimate army. Like, what?
Yeah.
And it's also very Chinese driven, which is kind of weird because I think Yu Suzuki was really into Chinese movies and kung fu and that kind of thing. As you can see,
he sends Ryo Hazuki to China.
Yeah, exactly, for that reason, because he really liked kung fu movies, and you could tell this is probably his idea of a plot.
Yeah.
But what do you think about the plot?
I mean, I did not know about the plot. I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of reading it for the first time right now. At least this kind of take on it. I had no idea there was this whole, like, in ancient history, this fighting style. I was more aware of the comic book, the Virtua Fighter comic book that came out from Marvel in, man, I don't know what year this is, but I want to say probably 94. And
or 95.
94 or 95. It's pretty bad. Yeah, 95. It's, they all live in Virtua City according to the comic. They're all training together for this event, but then Sarah's a spy and Jackie's a race car driver, which I guess is all correct. But Kagemaru is he's like avenging someone, and there's a secret organization, but they never get to the story. They say, we'll see ya in the game. And so if you read the comic and then you played the game, you'd be like, all right, so where's this plot you're talking about? Because there aren't cutscenes in the game, really.
No.
And,
like, arcade mode doesn't really have any story or ending cutscene that I remember. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any, right? Like in Street Fighter 2, when you beat the game, it would say like, Ryu is gonna go around the world and fight more people, and this person did this.
This is
Zangief is a Russian guy, and now he's the president of Russia. Is very happy.
Yeah, this is very much a late 80s, early 90s kind of thing that Sega would do, where they would promote the storyline in print materials and all these things. But when you play the game, you don't get that experience. You just get the character starting on stage 1.
Especially with AM2 games.
Exactly, yeah. And even, I guess you could say with like stuff like Sonic the Hedgehog, people would go, it was so, the story was so simple in the game, not even existing, that you could have different regions telling different stories. Like I read the comic, and then we read this, it's 2 different stories, but the game could fit either narrative. And I like that about Virtua Fighter, because I don't think the game needs to be bogged down by cutscenes and plot. I just want to play a good game.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
And I feel like a lot of fighting games, as the years go on, they get bogged down in this. Like Dead or Alive, I think, is a little too bogged down in its whole plot and universe. Which are there any fighting games with really long cutscenes?
Oh, dude. Blaze Blue and like the new Guilty Gear games. Like I was playing the Guilty Gear Zero 2, and I'm like, I'm gonna play some of the storyline. I started going on, and I'm like, dude, is this cutscene 30 minutes? It was ridiculous. I swear they have cutscenes that are like 30 minutes to an hour. It's like, really, do I really need to know about these characters' motivations? And I know people love the storylines of these games. There's fans of them. To me, it's like when I play a storyline, I kind of assume like they'll give you a little hint of the character, and then you fight, and then another little hint of the character progression, and then fight. Like Dead or Alive, you said it was too much. Yeah. This game makes Dead or Alive look like the most basic plot.
That's true. I mean, I prefer when a fighting game just kind of kicks off, and it'll be like, I must avenge my father. Ready, fight! And then it's like, if you win, he goes, Father, this one was for you. Like, and then it goes on to the next one.
Yeah, you could give a character story just with a few words or sentences between before a fight and after a fight.
Yeah. And actually, a silly aside, if people want to listen to Chris Tang's interviews, he actually, when he was working for Capcom, he wrote some of those intro and outro taunts and things. It's kind of funny to hear his process for writing those, if you're interested in that. But so that's a Swing and Report show we did.
Yeah, we'll link that in the description if you're listening to this.
Yeah. So the game itself, so moving on from the plot, there were 9 selectable fighters, including Akira Yuki, Pai Chan, Lao Chan, Wolf Hawkfield, Jeffrey McWild, which sounds like a really good McDonald's burger.
It does.
Kagemaru, or is it Kage? Kage. Cage?
And I would say, I would always call it Maru in the end.
Maru. There we go. Sarah Bryant, Jackie Bryant, and the boss Dural. And there were other characters that never made the roster, including Siba, who's a 31-year-old bouncer from Saudi Arabia, who later debuted in Fighters Megamix. Jeffrey Buckman, a 32-year-old U.S. Marine, which had moves based on Jackie, and Takeru, a 22-year-old college student from Japan that uses karate. So my question is, which was your main character to play as, and why?
I actually played as Jackie because he was the guy with the spiky blonde hair. I mean, there was no other reason, really. I was like, cool, this guy's blonde hair, spiky. His kicks are cool. They come out fast. Oh, yeah, I'm going to play this guy. But I started playing it when it was. I first played Virtua Fighter 2, and then I played 1. So I guess that kind of makes me biased because his character in 2 was totally different. Like, this one didn't have any talking, but when you played it in 2, he's like, "I'm faster than lightning." I was like, "Oh yeah, this guy's super annoying. I have to play this guy." Because I love playing annoying characters, because when you beat somebody with an annoying character, it just like, twists it a little bit more, right? The defeat. That's why I play Jackie. Who do you play?
I didn't think that's the kind of fighter you were, but I really like that. Sometimes I will, when I was playing All Stars Racing online, I would pick the worst racers. Like I'd pick what's her name from the GoDaddy ads, and I would
Danica Patrick.
Danica Patrick, and I would kick people's ass in races, and they'd be like, "Oh, why Danica?" But for me, for Virtua Fighter, I would say it's probably 50-50, either Sarah or Akira. When I play fighting games, I like to pick either the main character, because I assume they're the more balanced character, and I also like playing as the women because it's kind of a stereotype in video games, but in my opinion a positive one, that they're faster and they jump higher, and they do all these, like Princess Peach can like levitate, like why is it that the women always jump much better than the men? But I'm so used to, like, I guess, like Sonic games and speed, that I like faster characters, smaller, faster ones.
It's also like that in Streets of Rage. Like what's her name? She's like faster, but she has less health. Yeah. Yeah,
I play as her too a lot. Yeah.
Blaze. There you go. And then we have these 3 characters that never actually made it into the game. What do you think about that? And I think we've seen other ones where it's like they were redesigns, like they were looking more like Tekken characters. We did a video on that on the news bits, but any of these characters, I would have loved to see Siba, because I like the idea that a Saudi Arabian character. I like a mixture in fighting games. I think Street Fighter did it really well, and I think this game tried to do it, and I think it got better over the years, where they try to mix different nationalities inside their game. So that's the only character I would have played. I mean, these other 2 characters, to me, like Jeffrey Buckman and the other guy, Takuro, it's just another Japanese guy and another U.S. guy.
Yeah, it's like a karate guy and G.I. Joe. Like, it's very clear that they were going for a lot of kind of like character tropes, but I think it was wise of them to cut those 2. But I do wish Siba was in the game, because I do love his design, and he was actually probably the closest to being in the game, because if I'm remembering correctly, at least the US arcade machines, he's on the machine itself. Like, you see a picture of him.
Yeah, and he was also in a preview in magazines, so some magazines had him as a preview. But yeah, I don't know. I heard that I read a story about this, but like Yu Suzuki apparently stayed in at Sega, like he slept there for like a week straight, and when they showed up, the game was totally different. And he was out of the game, and they had Akira. He made Akira, so he's like, "Yeah, this is the main character now." It's like, okay, everybody in the team is just like, "All right, Yu Suzuki," I guess. And they asked him why, and I think they said something about like he was really into that fighting style that he made Akira have. I forget it's a fighting style, but he was really into it, so he decided to change the game. I don't know.
Well, I'd hope that if we ever get a Virtua Fighter 6 that they put Siba in it, and maybe even Buckman and Takeru, just for fun. That would be pretty cool.
And it's kind of funny that they were so ahead of their time with the Saudi Arabia characters, because Tekken 7 just had one in the new game, and Street Fighter 5 had one in Street Fighter 5, and King of Fighters 14 is going to have one as DLC, a Saudi Arabian character. So it's like, they're barely doing it now, but these guys had one way back in the 90s, in the early 90s.
Yeah, and he was only ever in Megamix, really.
Yeah.
So, Virtua Fighter was designed by Yu Suzuki, and I apologize if I butcher his name.
This is a hard name.
Seiichi Ishii.
Yeah, lots of eyes.
Ishii would later leave Sega to work with Namco on the first Tekken, and later work with Square to launch Toblerone series of fighting games. So, have you played the first Tekken or Tobal games, and if so, did you know it was created by the original Virtua Fighter designer, and what are your impressions? I feel like you have an answer for this.
Well, I had never played the first Tekken game. I actually never played the first Tekken game. I played the second two, and I've noticed that the only difference between there's a lot of differences between the games, but one of the main differences is that like Tekken literally cut the jumping out. Like you don't need to jump. Like Virtua Fighter, when you play, there's like this huge jump, and then it's like kind of floaty. Tekken probably like Namco saw what they did, and they're like, yeah, this doesn't feel right, and they just cut jumping out of Tekken. Like, so when you play Tekken, have you ever seen like pro fights? Very little jumping. In 7, they added jumping because they added Akuma and other characters. But yeah, so I think he learned from Virtua Fighter when he left and worked on Namco. Tobal, man, when I was a kid, I really wanted this game on the PlayStation, but I never got it because I couldn't afford it. But this game was actually designed, the character designs are by Akira Toriyama, who did Dragon Ball Z. And I was such a Dragon Ball Z fan that I wanted the game just because of that. But I played it later on, like in the early 2000s, when I got it, and it has really good animation and really wacky character designs.
Yeah.
So this is actually a really cool game. If you never heard of Tobal, pick up the first 2 games. They're fun to play, and the animation's really, really amazing in these games. Like it's a lot better than Tekken and Virtua Fighter, at least in my opinion, because it's like very smooth.
Yeah.
But the graphics are still like very Virtua Fighter 1, where they're like blocky.
Yeah, it's strange. I'm looking at screenshots of it, and it's basically if you're playing Dragon Ball Fighter Z right now, and you're a Virtua Fighter fan, it's kind of like a mashup.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a very weird game. Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as me, I never really played Tekken when I was, when it was out and about. I did play it later. No, I played it at an arcade. I take that back. I did play Tekken 2 at an arcade. I feel like the first one was like skipped by everybody, and it didn't really start picking up until like 2 and 3. Yeah, I mean, I can't really be, like Street Fighter, the original one, not many people play. But Street Fighter 2, everyone plays. So I feel like it's kind of similar with Tekken. I recall Tekken feeling very heavy. And now that you mentioned that jumping not being as necessary, that makes sense. I also felt that Tekken, it felt like a very Sony PlayStation kind of game, where it was like dark, and there was a lot of like electricity, and it was a little over the top with the character designs. I just remember the guy with like the tiger head.
King.
Yeah, and I just thought that was really bizarre.
One thing that I'm happy that Sega never did with the Virtua Fighter that they did with Street Fighter, that these people did with Street Fighter and Tekken, is like they always add this weird demon stuff. Like I'm like playing the game and I'm like, wait, what? This guy's a demon? What?
Yeah.
It's like evil Ryu. He's Ryu but evil, and it's the same thing with Tekken. They have characters that they have like devil genes. I just don't understand that. It's like a trope.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about Dural much, if at all, here. But, Dural, Virtua Fighter, like I've been saying, it's a very down to earth sort of pure game, but there isn't like magic, there isn't superpowers, but there is some weird stuff with Dural. And I kind of just pictured Dural as like the purest fighter that you're fighting, because it was stripped of all character design. It was just the silver being that it mimicked other fighters' styles.
Yeah, that's what she did. The idea was that they invite all these people to a tournament. That's just the basic idea, and then like the corporation and syndicate use their moves to make her, and she's actually Kagemaru's mother.
Right.
Because Kage's like he's looking for his mother, and he joins the tournament because he thinks he could find her there. And then it's the robot, and it's kind of, I guess, like a little tragic story for him.
Oh man, that's sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really glad that Virtua Fighter never went that route. And yeah, the whole demon thing, and I've probably played more Project Cross Zone than Tekken, and so I've gotten a taste of the storylines from those games. It's weird.
Ridiculous.
There's like clones of guys, or like old versions of guys, right? It's weird.
It's like a family thing where it's like Hitachi or whatever, one of them is like the grandfather killed the guy's mom and then
Yeah.
dropped his kid off a cliff because he had the devil gene. And then he comes back and he's like kills his dad, but then you find out the mom never died. It's like all this complicated plot that you shouldn't even be there.
Yeah. And is it heavy in the game? Like, is it apparent?
Yeah, they make a big deal out of the story mode. Like Tekken 7 had a huge story mode, and I was playing it, and it's like ridiculous. It's like so over the top. This guy Hitachi is like 80 years old, and he goes into this like military building, and they shoot rocket launchers like missiles at him, and he just punches them. And like they just like deflect and hit the walls, and I'm like, all right, this is weird. This is like very strange. It's like Yakuza, like over the top like Yakuza, but like they try to take it. I don't know if they take it seriously, but so you have to play this story. I mean, if you don't like stories in fighting games, it's gonna be a little over the top for you, especially compared to Virtua Fighter.
Yeah,
Especially
I don't mind.
yeah.
I don't mind stories, but I'm just kind of sick of the whole like Demon Gene and.
Yeah.
Let's wash our mouths out with the next tidbit here. So, Virtua Fighter was also one of the first 3D games that tried to model actual people as opposed to cars, or objects, which was a lot easier to do. The game ran on the Sega Model 1, and it was one of the 5 games to be made on that arcade board since Sega AM2 released the Model 2 right after Virtua Fighter came out. And so Model 1, the arcade board, it didn't support textures on polygons, which is why Virtua Fighter had those iconic solid-filled polygons. And here's a quote from Yu Suzuki, and I'll do my Yu Suzuki voice, which is exactly like my speaking voice. 3D graphics in games were very primitive. You could only make models from triangles, which didn't even have textures. There wasn't the opportunity to make graphics that were really beautiful, and because of that, I decided to spend all of my efforts to make character movesets correct and realistic. Yes, Street Fighter had nice sprites, but we had the advantage of very smooth movements. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Virtua Fighter low-resolution polygons seem to be well-liked now. Do you think they aged well and are charming?
I would say yes. I mean, I always like to look at the art. I mean, I think some of the figures they make, they kind of like take some artistic, liability. I mean, I guess freedom. Like those dolls or whatever, those little figures we have that you said you were talking about before, they look like they're made out of wood. Mm-hmm. They're not exactly like the video game one, but it's such a nice art style that, yeah, I think it's aged and it has its own charm. Especially now if you see all these indie developers trying to recreate the same look.
Yeah.
I would say that, yes, it has charm and it has lasting appeal. I think that other games that kind of had this like low resolution charm is like Starfox maybe, but I think it was so too low to the point where it's like barely like virtual racing was okay too, but like the people on there look ridiculous. Those guys putting the tires. So I would say this is probably the best low polygon solid filled game of all time. I mean graphically, for this time period.
Not to trash Star Fox, but when I was, hearing friends talk about it, they're like, "Oh, it's so cool! Look at it!" And I was like, "It's a bunch of fucking triangles." Like,
yeah,
I did not see the appeal of it until I played it, and I understand it's a very fun game, but design-wise, like,
very basic.
Yeah,
and it's funny because it also runs at a really low resolution, but I first saw it's not about Star Fox. We'll talk about Star Fox later. It's one of the games released in the same year that this came out, so I don't want to talk too much about Star Fox, but yeah, what do you think about the polygon and does it have charm, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, 2D graphics, I would say the 8-bit style is kind of the go-to for retro aesthetic, and then the probably 16 and 32-bit are kind of like the ultimate, like the modern, before you move into actual images or drawings, if that makes sense, like when you move beyond pixel graphics. So with 3D video game graphics, it's such a new thing. Like when SEGAbits started, it was like 2010, and 3D video games were basically like 18 years old. Like they weren't that old.
But they were pretty old, but not that old.
Yeah, but now I think we're finally getting to that point where the aesthetics and graphics of Virtua Fighter are now being seen like those 8-bit games. So people are like not looking at it now going, oh man, remember how crappy Nintendo 64 and Saturn looked, which is what people were saying in the late 90s and even 2000s. Now we're looking back fondly on those and going, oh man, don't those look great? Whereas I think people still have yet to get over probably like the late 90s stuff, because it started to move away from those simplistic designs and started to try to be really good, but it didn't look that great. Now it's hard to describe, but I guess yes, I think they aged well. But I guess what I'm trying to say is they're kind of like the equivalent of 8-bit graphics for 3D.
Yeah, I would say so. It was like 16-bit, and I think I mean a lot of people want to like say that say like a Sega Saturn, right?
Yeah.
And the PlayStation had their own like weirdness to them. Like PlayStation is really known for its like wonky textures. Like you'll see textures, and all of a sudden they'll be like all bent. There's no straight lines in it. They couldn't do straight lines. Yeah. And I think that this graphic is like the arcade version of Virtua Fighter is very sharp. And I think it looks really nice compared to what they were doing on the Sega Saturn and what they were doing on the PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this is aged better, because they knew if they did more work on it, it would be uglier. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I was trying to get at is that 3D graphics or 3D games, I think, unlike 2D games where it got progressively better, I think with 3D, it started out very good because it was simple, so you could understand what was going on, and then it kind of dipped when they started to try to do too much. Like, there are some great PlayStation games that I just can't play now, like Tenchu or Tenchu 2, because at the time I was like, oh, I see what they're going for, and it's a bit of a struggle to play this, but it's pretty cool. And now when I play it, I'm like, man, there's pop-up, and I can't understand what's going on the screen. Like, if only it was either more simple or a modern game. There's that middle period of like 1997 where 3D games were just...
They were trying to do too much.
Yeah.
And I think this is why this aged, because it was minimalistic. And I think a lot of people are into minimalistic now. So,
and I think Virtua Fighter 3... I think is probably less liked because it tried to do too much. You'd go out of the arena and it would continue onto like a roof or a street or something, and that's cool and all, but it didn't need that, I don't think.
And then there was also that it was the first game to actually have levels. Like the level was like you could fight downstairs. Like it wasn't just a flat surface. And then they took that back from 4 and 5. Like they never brought that back.
It was proof that it was a bad idea, and I just think the graphics too were not as great as they could have been.
1 and 2?
Yeah.
You wanna? Oh, let's talk about the ports.
Yeah, for sure. So Virtua Fighter had quite a lot of ports for the first game.
Actually, 2. And I wrote this, but actually 2 ports. Sorry, not quite a bit.
Quite a bit. 2. Well, 2 is more than 1.
It's because I thought that the Sega Genesis was based on Virtua Fighter 1, then I looked and it was actually based on Virtua Fighter 2, and I was like, oh damn, I thought that was it. And then I was going to talk about the little handheld one, the Tiger one, but that one's also 2, so it's like
no. I'm gonna redeem you. So like it didn't say 2 on the package, so yeah, it's a port of Virtua Fighter, right, for the Tiger game, and then there's Remix, and there's the original Saturn one, and there's the 32X one. So there's quite a bit, I would say. You were right.
All right.
But it seemed like Sega had trouble making a good port, and this was kind of a theme throughout the early Saturn era, really. I mean, you look at House of the Dead, you look at what's another one that was Daytona.
Yeah.
So Sega rushed a port for the game to launch with the Sega Saturn back in '94, which resulted in a lot of angry customers and fans. So Sega gave...
I forgot to take this out. I remember reading that they sent people free copies of Virtua Fighter Remix. That might be only in America, and it was a mail-in order, I think. But I didn't double check it, so I just want to say that.
It was in a paper sleeve, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. You had to mail it in.
I have the paper sleeve.
Of course you would. course you would, dude.
Yes. But the Virtua Fighter remix, it featured higher polygon models and gameplay changes, and it was developed by Sega AM1. So, So what are your thoughts on Virtua Fighter and Virtua Fighter remix ports on the Sega Saturn, and which one do you prefer?
I personally, I don't prefer either one. I mean, they're not perfect games.
Yeah.
I played the Sega Saturn one, and it was really bad that you couldn't run the first one. I really wish they would just make the first one right. The Virtua Fighter remix isn't that bad, though. I think a lot of people are saying, oh, they changed it. It's not the vision of Yu Suzuki, but it's like, it's pretty close, I would say. All things considered, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about the graphic changes, though?
For remix, I don't prefer either one of those. I'm kind of with you. I don't own the original Virtua Fighter for Saturn. I've always wanted to, but it's one of those games where I'm like, I have the 32X one in remix, so why would I want a lesser version unless I'm just a completionist? Virtua Fighter Remix I thought was a little better, but I didn't really like the changes. Like, if I want to play Virtua Fighter, let me play the original Virtua Fighter. Don't remix it, you know? It's so It happens so quickly too. It's like, oh man, we do the remix, and you're like, but I want the game. You messed up the first one.
I didn't put this on here, but like I heard the attach ratio in Japan from Virtua Fighter and the Saturn was like ridiculous, even though it was a terrible port.
Yeah. So
I think that's what led to them going, all right, we need to make this better, and they did remix.
Well,
and I guess it would have sold some Saturns in Japan too, right?
Yeah, but it didn't. So, let's talk about this one though. Virtua Fighter also had a 32X port in 1995, and this was a year after the port to the Sega Saturn. So the 32X port was actually ported over by the same team that delivered the Sega Genesis port of Virtua Racing, which was an impressive port considering it ran on a Model 1 game on a 16-bit hardware. So what are our impressions on Virtua Fighter for the 32X, and how does it stack up and compare to the other 32X titles?
It's like 40 of them, so it's
Yeah,
like not
40.
that many to stack up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with the 32X, it's not arcade perfect, so a lot of people say like, oh, if it's not arcade perfect, then it's trash. It's the best version of Virtua Fighter 1 that you could play at your house that isn't emulated from the arcade.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to play, I guess, the most pure version, this is probably it, but it's not. The graphics are a downgrade, so you got to know that, right?
Yeah.
And,
I mean,
outside of that, I mean, it's a good port if you had a 32X. 32X, sadly, was not as supported as it should have been, but I mean, it was that was a weird time with Sega, right? They were launching the Sega Saturn. They had a 32X add-on. They could do 32-bit games, but they had another 32-bit console. So they had to like stretch their development teams there, and then they had arcade. So it was a weird time for Sega at this time.
I do believe that I remember looking into this that era, Sega was supporting every single console, including the Master System, in some region. So you could buy a game for any Sega console up to the Saturn in that era. They were releasing new games, and I mean, I'm looking at the Sega Visions issue 24, I think, and when you look inside, they have sections for Saturn, 32X, CD, Genesis, and Game Gear. So, I mean, talk about spreading yourselves thin. And you did say there were 40 32X games, and
how many do you have of those?
I just looked now. I have 22 of them, and I'm not like a completionist. I just buy them as I see them if I find them interesting. I've passed up on a few just because I'm like, do I really want like a baseball game for the 32X? But
I have like 18, so about the same. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a few crappy ones, so I'm sure I could whittle it down to 18 if I didn't want to own some of these. But as far as how it stacks up to other titles, I'd say it's one of the better games. The 32X to me really excels if you are treating it as a
extension,
and also basically having a Model 1 in your house. You know, it's like the closest thing to having a Model 1 playing games on a cartridge. And there's a novelty to that, like the fact that it's not spinning a CD, like you're playing Virtua Fighter on a cartridge. That's pretty cool. Load times are very good, obviously, and so if you have Afterburner, Virtua Fighter, and Space Harrier, and Star Wars Arcade, you've got a very good collection there, and Virtua Racing of early Sega arcade titles, and then you can kind of branch out. This isn't a 32X episode, but you can get Zaxxon's Mother Base, you can get Tempo, you can get trying to think, Shadow Squadron, there's Calibri, Chaotix. So there's a lot of good games. I wouldn't say Virtua Fighter is the best one on there because it is downgraded a little bit, but it's definitely a must-own just because it's such a great port, and it's my preferred way to play the game at home. So. And
I think this is probably one of the games that kind of showed the power of the 32X, because a lot of the other games were 2D, Space Harrier, yes, it ran great, but it was still a 2D game from the 80s, but it was the best version at home of that game. So I would say the 32X, I don't know, I would want to see more 3D games on it. But obviously it never happened. But this is a pretty cool port, and I would say, it's a top 10 game, I would say, on the 32X for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they were really pushing it at the time. Looking at the Sega Visions feature on it, they really pushed the fact that, you're playing a smash hit on your 32X. And they're talking all about, 700 plus moves of its arcade smash precursor, along with all the stages and voice effects.
I really love the Sega Vision, because it was really, Sega Vision was just a magazine where they sent to you Sega propaganda directly to your house, directly from Sega. So it's they say the most bizarre stuff. They're 700 moves, 700 plus moves. It's whoa, 700 moves? You could do can you really do 700 moves in that game? Are most people going to memorize 700 moves?
Yeah, for sure. And then they also, they really... They say, the game packs 4 cameras, original, high, bird's eye, and skycam. New views, change your display from normal to squeeze, and make the fighters taller, thinner, or closer together. Smaller and larger rings? Yeah, baby. Fight in rings in 5 sizes, from 4 meters in diameter all the way up to 24. I gotta read this part. Do you get the great music? Damned right. You'll enjoy your favorite arcade tunes fully resequenced for the Genesis 32X. New modes? Yes, sir or ma'am. Pick one. In addition to arcade versus and ranking, try a tournament mode that lets you and the schmuck of your choice take it up in line with a complete pool of fighters. Blah, blah, blah.
Somebody with a mullet wrote that.
I know. Oh, man.
I like the fact that it was so progressive.
Sir or ma'am, pick one.
You got to pick one. Uh-oh. We don't want to get in trouble with this one. I was going to say, let me read out. Okay, we do this part of the podcast where we kind of go through what culture was happening during the release of said game we talk about. This game came out in 1993, so I'm going to mention the games that came out in 1993 to see how it stacks up compared to, tech. Mm-hmm. So these are the games that came out. I put some fighting games and I put some early 3D games. Mortal Kombat 2, Samurai Showdown, Doom, Starfox, Daytona USA, which got a limited release in 93 but came out in 94, Mega Man X, and Ridge Racer came out this year.
It's Ridge Racer. Ridge
Racer. So yeah, people were still... Even AM2 was still doing car games. Like Daytona USA did change from 93 to 94, what the approach of it. But that was the first game to have the featured polygon, right? And then Ridge Racer, I never played Ridge Racer 1, but it was I played a little bit of it, but it's one track and one car, so it's very basic. And Starfox came out in consoles, which kind of, I guess, impressed a lot of people. But, I mean, compared to Virtua Fighter, it's totally different era of 3D. Virtua Fighter was so good at 3D that it kind of makes Starfox look really primitive, especially with the low frame rates it had. Mm-hmm. And Samurai Showdown came out. Those still in Mortal Kombat 2. Those were still sprite fighting games. And it's kind of funny because Mortal Kombat wanted to be realistic by taking the photographs of people. But yeah, I don't know. What is your opinion on these games, and how does Virtua Fighter stack up to these?
Well, I would say that Virtua Fighter definitely puts most of these games to shame. As mentioned, they were doing 3D animations of characters, which is far more impressive than cars. So I think Ridge Racer and even Daytona USA are kind of put at a disadvantage here. Starfox, great gameplay, choppy graphics, and like I was saying, like the ship design, I never found the Starfox ship to be appealing. Like, I don't know why you'd want to own a model of that. It's just kind of and then really these 2D games that we're looking at, they're kind of the end of an era, really. At least I don't know, I think there were a lot of great 2D games beyond 1993, obviously, but it was, Virtua Fighter was kind of a sign of things to come. And so as 94, 95 went on, you didn't get as many great 2D games, I would say. I mean, even to the point where Sega themselves had a great 2D powerhouse machine in the Sega Saturn, but they did not want to push it as a 2D machine.
Which I think was kind of a mistake, personally. But I think maybe at the time, people were wanting to jump on 3D, especially with Mario 64 and all these other games like Metal Gear Solid, really pushing polygons. Like, I remember people telling me, "Oh, you got to play Final Fantasy VII. It's one of the most cinematic games I've ever made." And I was like, "All right," played it, and I was like, "What is this? This is not cinematic. This is not even fully 3D." It really made me angry because, like, I could tell that only parts of the game were 3D.
Yeah,
it's not a terrible game, but it was pretty overhyped.
What,
at the
Final
time.
Fantasy VII is not a terrible game?
I mean, there's a lot more terrible games out there, especially during the JRPG era. Personally, I'm not that big of a fan, but there is a big fan base, and I don't want to insult anybody. I'm trying to be a nice guy here.
Come on, George. Cloud Strife is awesome.
I was gonna say, what do you think about? This is one thing that always kind of irritates me, where like people talk about Doom being like the future or being revolutionary, that it made 3D gaming. I mean, it did 3D, but it was still 2D, so it's kind of like a pseudo 3D. Like they did what they kind of perfected what AM2 did with sprite scaling, but like they made it in the first-person shooter. But I'm like, AM2 was already doing that in the 80s, and then Virtua Fighter came out the same year as the first Doom.
Yeah.
And that's actual 3D polygons, and it's like, I feel like the game media in the US kind of forgets how AM2 innovated a lot of things, and just go, "Oh, I played Doom as a kid, so Doom is the most innovative game in 1993." But is it?
I mean, yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think it was a good marriage of two different styles, but not the most innovative of the year. No.
I guess if you're just talking FPS games, yeah, I would give it that, because it's kind of technically the first popular FPS game.
Yeah.
But as far as technology, I think Virtua Fighter did some crazy stuff with the animation.
For sure.
Let's talk about the top movies in '93.
Yeah.
You might have seen a couple of these. Jurassic Park, Miss Doubtfire. These are the top movies, by the way. The Fugitive, Schindler's List, and The Firm. I've never watched The Firm. I don't know what it is, but the other four, I've seen them, and they're all classics, especially Mrs. Doubtfire. That's one of the best movies ever. But, I mean, what do you think about these movies, and what do you think about how there's no more movies where a comedic actor dresses like a woman?
Well, in terms of these movies, I've seen all but The Firm. I know it's a legal drama, and it was based on a really popular book, from my knowledge. But yeah, Schindler's List, funny movie, but no.
Funny movie.
The Fugitive was... I love The Fugitive. I want to see that again. I haven't seen it in a long time.
It's crazy. That movie is one of those movies that's like spoofed so much. Like, I think there was a Simpsons spoof, and I remember like that waterfall scene when the guy jumps.
Yeah.
It's like the biggest spoof scene of all time, I think. And I think a lot of new kids like watch just random cartoons like Family Guy that like spoofs random stuff from the 80s and early 90s are not even gonna understand what it is. They just laugh, I guess.
Well, did you know
cool.
The Fugitive's based on a 1960s TV series?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
wow.
And it's the ongoing story is basically that, where it's like there's a train crash and there's a one-armed man, and so it's... I mean, it was a TV series. It ran... I don't know how long it ran, but it ran 4 seasons.
Have you seen it?
I saw it like last week, actually. It was on MeTV.
And how is the acting?
It's not bad, but it was just, it's kind of weird to hear them talking about like the one-armed man and all that. Like, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot they based the movie's based on this. Looking at this list though, obviously it's hard to make any ties to Virtua Fighter unless Mrs. Doubtfire with the cross-dressing. Didn't Jackie cross-dress as Sarah or something
Sarah
like
Bryan,
that?
that's part of the plot. He gets amnesia and he's like, oh no, I'm actually a woman.
But I will say
Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was the first movie to like kind of popularize CGI in film.
Yeah, I was hoping you would go there. In fact, Jurassic Park, there was several CG films before Jurassic Park, but Jurassic Park was the first one, I think, to really seamlessly put CG creatures into a film. And maybe Terminator 2, but
I think they're the same coin kind of a thing. Like,
yeah,
they were like really close to each other.
Terminator 2 though, and even what's the movie, The Abyss, like they would have to do water effects or like silvery kind of dural almost kind of things. But the interesting thing
that's where they got it.
The interesting thing is with Jurassic Park is that it was really a marriage of old school techniques and new technology, because if you recall, Jurassic Park was originally going to have stop motion characters, and they even went so far as to try out some scenes and train a whole group of people to know dinosaur movements inside and out and hand animate these stop motion creatures. And then they were like, no, we're going to do CG. And what they did, and which I wish they would do more often, I don't think they do this anymore, is they built these armatures, these physical like skeletons, little tabletop ones of dinosaurs, and then the stop motion animators would actually move them, and instead of taking a picture of a model, they would push a button and it would record that pose. And so Jurassic Park, despite being CG, it was animated by hand.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
and how do you know how dinosaurs move though? Like, do they go to dinosaur college?
Obviously we don't, but they would look at reference footage of like chickens running and birds running, things like that. I think they got a lot wrong. Like, obviously, I think some of the creatures like can't actually move that fast or can't do certain things. But
to me, this is how dinosaurs were back then. Like, to me, this is 100% real. Sorry.
but I guess to bring it back to Virtua Fighter, it was like you were saying, it was the first to really make it, known that this is the future of film and this is what you're going to be seeing moving forward. Before that, people just thought it was a tool you use sometimes. But there it was like, oh, this can carry a movie, just like with Virtua Fighter, 3D graphics can carry a animated character in a game. And so it was really, 1993 really was a turning point for 3D graphics, both in video games and in film. And you look at Jurassic Park 2 in 93, 94, you were seeing Jurassic Park games all over the place. So it's
Sega even had some.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There was Lost World on the Saturn, actually. That game, I'm not going to get into it, but I think there is some pretty well-known developers and composers behind that too. I'm trying to remember who composed it, but
they did a Model 3 game, I think, too, right? Sega, the one that you ride in a Jeep and then you shoot dinosaurs.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, and so it's kind of funny that Sega would end up actually running a Jurassic Park game on their hardware. So there you go. It's like two very influential 3D technologies actually crossing over, where they're basically using Virtua Fighter tech to animate Jurassic Park.
That's crazy. Thank you, Mighty Yu Suzuki.
That's really crazy, actually. Wow.
And that's a good way to close up the episode. You want anything to say anything to the people before we close it up?
Well, if you enjoyed this, let us know by subscribing, giving us positive reviews on iTunes and on YouTube. And I always appreciate comments, even if they're negative. But make them constructive. Don't just be like, there's a girl.
George is fucking stupid.
George said a word wrong.
Exactly. Well, I'm alright with that. And let us know what other game you guys want to see us cover on the future episode of Sega Talk. And thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it. Good night.
Bye.
Okay.